All right, AP Euro legends, buckle up because we're about to go into one of the most crazy periods of French history. I want you to picture this. It's 1559. Henry II of France is feeling pretty good about himself. He's just signed the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis, ending his wars with Spain, and now it's time to celebrate with some good old-fashioned medieval entertainment, a jousting tournament. Now picture the scene. We've got royal weddings happening. Henry's daughter Elizabeth is marrying the King of Spain by proxy, because apparently that was a thing back then, and his sister Marguerite is about to marry the Duke of Savoy. The whole court is in party mode. Lists are set up at the end of the Rue Saint-Antoine, right near the royal palace, and for 3 days straight, the nobles are having the time of their lives, and these ladies are swooning in the stands. But here's where it gets spicy. Henry II, who's pushing 40 and should probably know better, decides he's not done showing off yet. He's been wearing the colors of his mistress, Diana de Poitiers, which was black and white, the colors of widows, which is actually kind of creepy when you think about it. And the queen begs him to stop. But Henry's like, one more joust! Famous words, right? So Henry charges at the Count of Montgomery, and here's where everything goes sideways. They crash into each other, lances shatter as they're supposed to, but Montgomery, and this is crucial, forgets to throw away the broken piece of his lance like he's supposed to. Instead, this wooden splinter punches right through the bars of Henry's helmet and goes straight into his eye, penetrating his brain. Henry falls forward onto his horse's neck, gets carried to the end of the arena, and must have been the most awkward moment in tournament history, and boom, the whole course of European history just changed because of a jousting accident. He lingers for 11 agonizing days before dying on July 10th, 1559. And here's the kicker. Protestant Europe is like, yes! God just struck down our prosecutor, while Catherine de Medici is sitting there thinking, oh no, I'm about to become the most powerful woman in France, and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So let's talk about Catherine de Medici, because this woman is about to dominate French politics for the next 30 years, and she is fascinating. First off, she's Italian nobility, a Medici, so she comes preloaded with political scheming skills. But here's the thing, Henry II basically ignored her for their entire marriage. While she was popping out future kings, Henry was off with his mistress, Diana de Poitiers, who was old enough to be Catherine's mother and had been his dad's mistress first. Talk about keeping it in the royal family. Catherine had been relegated to the sidelines, watching, learning, and probably plotting revenge. The sources describe her as intelligent and artistically refined, but morally, let's just say, she was a little flexible. She'd been kept ignorant of state affairs, so when Henry suddenly dies, she's got to figure out how to rule France with 4 sickly sons in a country that's about to tear itself apart over religion. Now, her oldest son, Francis II, becomes king, but he's only 16, and let's be honest, not exactly the sharpest sword in the armory. He's weak-willed, he's sickly, and completely dominated by others. So who steps into the power vacuum? The Guise family. Specifically Francis, Duke of Guise, and his brother Charles, the Cardinal of Lorraine. This is where it gets complicated. Francis II is married to Mary Stuart, yes, that Mary Queen of Scots, and Mary's uncles are the Guise brothers. So suddenly, these ambitious nobles from Lorraine have their hands on the levers of French power. The Duke of Guise gets control of military affairs, the Cardinal gets civil affairs, and Catherine is supposedly the regent, but really has about as much power as the decorative vase. But she's not stupid. She's watching, she's waiting, and she's learning that in 16th century France, if you want to survive, you need to play all sides against each other. She develops what I like to call the Catherine method. Manipulate everyone's passions, keep them fighting each other, and maintain power by making sure no one gets too powerful. Meanwhile, we've got other noble families who are not happy about Guise dominance. The Bourbons, led by Antoine of Navarre and his brother Louis, Prince of Condé, are sitting there thinking, hey, we're closer to the royal bloodline than these Guise upstarts. And then there's the old Constable Montmorency, who's been around forever and is basically the embodiment of back in my day. But here's the real game changer. France is about to get hit by the Protestant Reformation like a freight train, and religious differences are about to become the perfect excuse for political power grabs. Okay, so we need to understand that what we call the French religious wars aren't really about religion. I mean, they are, but they're also about politics, power, money, and good old-fashioned noble rivalry. It's like if Twitter beef became actual warfare. The French Protestants, who get called Huguenots, are recruited heavily from the nobility who happen to hate the Guise family. Convenient, right? So when the nobles join the Protestant cause, are they doing it because they've had a genuine religious awakening or because they want to stick it to the Guises? Well, why not both? The first major crisis happens in 1560 with something called the Amboise conspiracy. About 600 Protestant nobles and Guise enemies meet secretly at Nantes and decide they're going to storm the royal court at Blois, grab the young king, and get rid of these odious Guises. It's like a medieval coup attempt, and about as well planned as you'd expect from 600 people trying to keep it a secret. The Duke of Guise gets wind of the plot, I know, isn't that so shocking, and moves the court to the more defensible chateau of Amboise. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Both Admiral Coligny and the Prince of Condé show up at court, and Guise receives them like nothing's wrong. He's literally assigning them defensive positions while knowing they might be plotting against him. It's either the most chivalrous thing ever or the most manipulative, but it's probably both. The conspiracy falls apart spectacularly. The rebels attack on March 16th instead of the 15th because, apparently revolutionary timing is pretty hard, and Guise's forces are ready for them. The leader, La Renaudot, gets killed in the fighting, and suddenly Guise has about 1,200 prisoners on his hands. And this gets dark. Guise doesn't just execute them, oh no, he makes it a show. Prisoners are hanged in batches, some in front of the court, turning the whole thing into a medieval snuff film. Even the princesses are horrified, which finally gives Catherine de Medici some leverage. She's like, maybe we should tone down the max executions, And suddenly she's leading her first political faction. But the Protestants aren't going away. If anything, the Amboise executions just make them angrier and more desperate. Both sides start looking for foreign help. The Catholics get support from Spain's Philip II, while the Protestants start flirting with Protestant England. And folks, when French nobles start inviting foreign armies into France, things are about to get really messy. The final straw comes in 1562 at a little town called Vassy. The Duke of Guise is traveling through with his armed retinue when they come across a Protestant worship service happening in a barn by the road. Now, technically, the Protestants have legal permission to worship there, but Guise's guards decide to disperse them with swords. 60 Protestants end up dead, hundreds more wounded, and Guise rides on like nothing happened. This is it. This is the spark that lights the fuse. When the news of the Vassy massacre spreads, Huguenots everywhere grab their weapons. The Duke of Guise responds by basically kidnapping the young king and his mother, taking them to Catholic Paris, and just like that, France plunges into civil war. So now you've got full-scale civil war, and it's absolute chaos. The Prince of Condé declares himself defender of the king and protector of the realm, which is medieval speak for I'm rebelling, but it's totally legal, guys. Within weeks, the Huguenots control about 200 towns, including major cities like Rouen, Lyon, Tours, and Orléans. Not bad for a religious minority. But here's where both sides make the same catastrophic mistake. They invite foreign armies into France. The Catholics get Spanish troops from Philip II, while the Protestants make a deal with Protestant England's Elizabeth I. Elizabeth sends troops to help Rouen in exchange for the Port of Le Havre as collateral. So now we've got Spanish soldiers and English soldiers fighting on French soil, which is exactly the kind of foreign intervention that makes civil war 10 times worse. The military action focuses on northern France, and it's brutal. The siege of Rouen becomes a meat grinder. Antoine of Bourbon, the King of Navarre, takes a fatal wound there. And here's a fun detail. The great essayist Montaigne records that during this siege, a Protestant gentleman was captured on a mission to assassinate the Duke of Guise. But instead of executing him, Guise pardons him and says something like, "I'll show you how much more merciful my religion is than yours." It's either genuine Christian charity or it's really passive aggressive. But this is the 16th century. When Rouen finally falls, it gets pillaged for a solid week because apparently both Catholics and Protestants agree that war profiteering is non-denominational. The decisive battle happens at Dreux on December 19th, 1562, and it's one of those battles where both sides can claim victory because all the commanders get captured by the wrong army. Condé gets taken prisoner by the Catholics, but the Huguenots capture the Constable Montmorency. It's like a medieval prisoner exchange program, except with a lot more stabbing. Here's a detail that shows you how chivalrous this war could be. After the battle, Guise and his prisoner Condé share the same tent and the same bed. That was very common in this era. Condé later reported that while he lay awake all night thinking about his situation, Guise slept like a baby. That takes either supreme confidence or a remarkably clear conscience. But the war is not over. Guise besieges the Protestant stronghold of Orléans, and this is where the story comes to an abrupt end. A Huguenot gentleman named Poltrot shoots Guise with a pistol, which is basically the 16th century equivalent of a drive-by shooting, and Guise lingers for 9 days and dies with what everyone agrees was exemplary courage and piety. With the main commanders either dead or captured, both sides basically shrug and decide to make peace. The Edict of Amboise in March 1563 gives the Protestants limited worship rights in the towns they currently control. It's like a medieval ceasefire that nobody really expects to last, and spoiler alert, it does not. Catherine de' Medici uses this interlude to grab back some real power. She has the Parliament of Rouen declare her son Charles IX, now 13, old enough to rule. Of course, he's still completely under mommy's control, but at least she doesn't have to pretend to share power with anyone else. But here's the thing about teenage kings who grow up during civil wars. They develop some seriously twisted ideas about leadership. Charles IX has been watching massacres since he was 10 years old. He's seen Protestant prisoners executed at Rouen, and instead of being horrified, he just seems to think that's how kings handle problems. Catherine has created a monster, and she doesn't even realize it yet. The peace also doesn't solve the fundamental problem. You've got two religious communities that literally believe the other side is going to hell, and they're all armed. Plus, the noble families are still settling scores that have nothing to do with theology and everything to do with wounded pride and lost revenues. Sure enough, tensions start building again almost immediately. Both sides accuse each other of violating the Edict of Amboise. The Guises claim Admiral Coligny was behind the assassination of Francis of Guise, and Coligny shows up at court with what amounts to a private army to defend himself. Charles IX responds by increasing his Swiss Guard from 100 to 1,000 men because nothing says peaceful resolution like military escalation. The stage is set for round 2, and it's going to be even bloodier than round 1. So Catherine de' Medici finds herself in the impossible position of trying to keep France from completely falling apart while managing a teenage son who's developing some serious anger management issues. Her solution? Play all sides against each other while pretending to be neutral. It's like being a kindergarten teacher, except the kids have armies. The Second Religious War breaks out in 1567, and it starts with another failed coup attempt. The Huguenots try to surprise the court at Monceau and kidnap the king, because apparently they didn't learn from the Amboise disaster. And when that fails, they chase the royal family from chateau to chateau like some kind of deadly game of tag. This leads to the Battle of Saint-Denis, where something both tragic and absurd happens. The old Constable Montmorency, who's been serving French kings since before most of these guys were born, gets shot by a Scottish captain named Stuart, who has a personal grudge against him. So the veteran warrior of France dies in what's essentially a medieval drive-by shooting, part 2, and Montmorency's last stand becomes this chaotic medieval mosh pit where everyone's trying to either capture or protect his body. After Montmorency's death, young Charles IX asks who won the battle, and the marshal gives the most perfectly cynical answer to the entire period. Neither Catholic nor Protestant. It's the King of Spain who won through our discord, and that, folks, is the entire French religious wars in one sentence, pretty much. The war drags on through a miserable winter campaign where both armies are too cold to fight properly. When spring comes, the Huguenots are outnumbered and have to retreat toward La Rochelle. This sets up the Battle of Jarnac in 1569, and this is where things get really dramatic. Prince Condé, the Protestant military leader, breaks his leg when his horse kicks him right before the battle. But does he retreat to get medical attention? Of course not. He keeps fighting, shouting to his men to remember how Louis de Bourbon fights for Christ and his country. His horse gets shot out from under him, he falls, and in the chaos that follows, he's murdered while trying to surrender by some Catholic officer who shoots him point blank in the head. Now, the death of Condé could have ended Protestant resistance, but this is where we meet one of the most remarkable women of the 16th century, Jeanne d'Albret, Queen of Navarre. She shows up at the Protestant army headquarters with her 15-year-old son Henry, who will be the future Henry IV, and basically says, "Here are your new commanders that God has sent you." This teenager and his mother are about to save the Protestant cause. Meanwhile, Admiral Coligny proves he's basically the Energizer Bunny of French warfare. No matter how many times the Catholics defeat him, he just keeps coming back, like a medieval Michael Myers. He loses at Jarnac, loses at Moncontour, but somehow always manages to rebuild his army and keep fighting. The Catholics win all the battles, but they can never quite finish the job, which tells you everything you need to know about the staying power of religious conviction mixed with political desperation. By 1570, everyone's exhausted from fighting, so Catherine negotiates the Peace of Saint-Germain, which gives Huguenots some of their best terms yet. They get religious freedom in 2 towns per province, equal access to government offices, and 4 fortified towns as security deposits. It's peace treaty, but with collateral. But Catherine's got a bigger game in play. She has decided that the solution to France's religious problem is to marry her daughter, Marguerite, to the Protestant Henry of Navarre. Now, this is either brilliant realpolitik or completely insane, depending on your perspective. Marguerite has opinions about this marriage. She's 18, she's gorgeous, and she's already involved with Henry, the Duke of Guise, the son of the assassinated Francis of Guise, and probably the most eligible bachelor in France. But daddy issues aside, this guy is gorgeous, he's charming, and represents everything Marguerite finds attractive. Unfortunately, he also represents everything Catherine finds threatening to royal power. The whole situation comes to a head when Charles IX literally orders his illegitimate brother to murder the Duke of Guise during a hunting party. Well, the brother chickens out, someone warns Guise, and suddenly the young Duke realizes he needs to make some serious lifestyle changes. He hastily marries someone else and gets back in the king's good graces, while Marguerite sulks about because she lost her dream boyfriend. Meanwhile, Admiral Coligny is becoming Charles IX's new best friend, which absolutely terrifies Catherine because Coligny's got all these grand plans for uniting France by attacking the Spanish Netherlands, basically starting a foreign war to end the religious civil war. Now, Charles loves this idea because it means military glory for him, which he's always aspired to. But Catherine sees it as Coligny manipulating her son away from her own influence. Well, the marriage negotiations continue, and this is where it gets even more complicated. The Pope refuses to give the dispensation needed for the marriage because Henry of Navarre, he's a Calvinist, he's a heretic. Catherine basically tells the Pope where he can stick his dispensation and proceeds with the wedding anyway. And this is basically her saying, we don't need your permission. Henry's mother, Jeanne d'Albret, comes to Paris for the wedding negotiation and she dies. Now, everyone assumes Catherine poisoned her because at this point, people assume that Catherine has pretty much poisoned half of Europe. Modern historians think Jeanne probably died of natural causes, but in the 16th century, if a political inconvenience dies suddenly, poison usually gets the blame. The wedding finally happened on August 22nd, 1572, on a platform in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. The story goes that Marguerite refused to say "I do," and Charles IX had to push her head forward to make her nod in agreement. Now, whether that's true or just good gossip, it perfectly captures the atmosphere of coercion around this whole event. Hundreds of Protestant nobles flood into Paris for the wedding, which hasn't seen this many Huguenots since, ever. And they're feeling pretty triumphant. Their leader just got married into the royal family. They've got the king's ear through Admiral Coligny. And for once, things seem to be going their way. But they have no idea that they're walking into the most elaborate trap in French history. All right, Here's where our story takes a turn into absolute nightmare territory. We're talking about one of the most infamous massacres in European history, and it all starts with Catherine de' Medici having what might be the worst case of political paranoia ever recorded. So Catherine is watching Admiral Coligny getting cozier and cozier with her son Charles IX, and she's convinced that Coligny is going to manipulate the king in some disastrous foreign war that will destroy her influence. She decides the solution is simple. Assassinate Coligny. Just a quick, clean political murder. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Catherine teams up with the Guise family, specifically the Duchess of Nemours, the old Duke of Guise's widow, and her son Henry, the new Duke of Guise. They hire a professional assassin named Maurevert, and having professional assassins was apparently a thing in 16th century France. Well, on the morning of August 22nd, 1572, the same day as the royal wedding, Coligny is walking slowly back from the Louvre, reading a petition like a medieval multitasker, when a shot rings out from a window. The ball takes off Coligny's index finger and lodges into his left arm. He's wounded but very much alive, which is the last thing Catherine wanted. Charles IX is absolutely furious. He throws down his tennis racket, because he was playing tennis at the time, and starts swearing up a storm about finding the assassin. He orders a full investigation and promises to visit Coligny that afternoon to personally ensure his recovery. This is the complete opposite of everything Catherine hoped would happen. When Charles visits Coligny, surrounded by the entire court, including Catherine, the wounded admiral basically tells the king that the Spanish are getting all their intelligence from someone very close to the royal family. Now, he's not directly accusing Catherine of being a Spanish spy, but okay, he is. He kind of is. And he's doing it while staring meaningfully at the Queen Mother. Catherine realizes she's in serious trouble. If the investigation proceeds, it's going to lead straight back to her. If Coligny recovers, he's going to have even more influence over Charles. And if Charles finds out his mother tried to assassinate his favorite advisor, there's going to be some serious mother and son drama. So Catherine and the Duke of Anjou, Charles's brother, Henry, her favorite son, go into crisis mode. They call a secret meeting in the Tuileries garden with their top advisors, and this is where the massacre gets planned. Catherine tells Charles that the Huguenots are arming throughout Paris, planning to overthrow him and put Admiral Coligny in charge. The Catholics, she claims, are ready to elect their own captain general and start their own rebellion if Charles doesn't act now. She's basically telling her son he's about to be caught between two armies and his only choice is to strike first. Charles resists for over an hour. He keeps saying things like, "But my honor, but my friends." He specifically mentions his friends, namely the Admiral Coligny, and his son-in-law, Tillignan. These aren't just political allies, they're personal friends. Finally, Catherine plays the trump card. She and Anjou threaten to leave court, implying they'll go start their own Catholic rebellion if Charles won't act. And that's when Charles realizes that if his mother and his brother abandon him, he'll be completely isolated from everyone. In a moment of panic and fury, he screams, "By the death of God, since you think it good to kill the admiral, I will have it so. But kill all the Huguenots in France as well, that there may not be left one of them to reproach me afterwards." And just like that, a failed assassination attempt becomes a planned genocide. The conspirators spend the rest of the day and night organizing the massacre. They tell the city militia that a Protestant conspiracy against the king has been discovered and that the king wants every heretic in Paris killed. For extra motivation, they promise that after the killing is done, all Protestant property will be free for looting. The signal is supposed to be the ringing of the great bell of the Palais at dawn, but Catherine gets real impatient and has the bell of Saint-Germain rung an hour early. The Duke of Guise and his men immediately head to Admiral Coligny's house. What happens next is horror. Coligny is awakened by the noise. He tells his servants to save themselves, and he prepares for death with prayer. The assassins break down his door, and a German mercenary named Besme stabs the admiral multiple times. When Guise calls up from the courtyard asking for proof, they throw Coligny's body out the window. Guise then wipes the blood off the admiral's face to confirm his identity and then orders the head cut off. But that's just the beginning. All across Paris, church bells are ringing, torches are being lit in windows, and Catholic militias are going house to house, killing every Protestant they can get their hands on. Now, white crosses in the hats are supposed to identify the Catholics, but in the chaos, anyone can put on a white cross, and it becomes a citywide killing frenzy. Even the Louvre becomes a slaughterhouse. Protestant nobles who were staying in the palace as royal guests are called out one by one and murdered by the guards. Some cry out about the king's promise of protection, and others die in silent dignity. The massacre lasts for days, and one goldsmith even brags about killing 400 people with his own hands. Bodies are thrown into the Seine until the river runs red. The estimated death toll ranges from 3,000 in Paris to 25,000 throughout France when the killing spreads to other cities. But this is what makes it even more horrific. Charles IX, who ordered the massacre in a moment of panic, seems to regret it almost immediately. But once unleashed, this kind of violence is impossible to control. The mob has its own momentum, and royal proclamations to stop the killing are completely ignored. The massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day achieves exactly the opposite of what Catherine intended. And instead of solving France's religious problem, it makes everything infinitely worse. The Protestant survivors are more determined than ever. Catholic moderates are horrified by the brutality, and foreign Protestant powers like England and the Dutch rebels are now actively hostile to France. Charles IX tries to spin the massacre as a preemptive strike against a Protestant rebellion, but nobody believes that. The international reaction ranges from celebration in Spain and the Papal States to horror and disgust in Protestant Europe. The Pope orders a Te Deum sing in thanksgiving, while Elizabeth I of England gives the French ambassador the silent treatment for weeks. But the real victim of St. Bartholomew's Day is Charles IX himself. The sources describe a young man who seems to suffer from what we would probably now recognize as severe PTSD. He can't sleep without seeing visions of corpses floating in the river. He suffers violent hemorrhages where he literally wakes up covered in blood, and that reminds him of the blood he ordered spilled. The night before his death, his old Protestant nurse hears him weeping and crying out, "What streams of blood! How many murders! What wicked counsel I have had! Oh my God, pardon me and grant me mercy. I know not where I am, so much do they agitate and perplex me. What will become of all this country?" And Charles IX dies on May 30th, 1574, at the age of 23, probably from tuberculosis, though some suspected poison because, well, this is France. His last words were that he was glad he wasn't leaving a male heir to inherit the mess he was leaving behind. And what a mess it was. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre had created a third faction in French politics, the politiques, Catholics and Protestants who were so disgusted by the religious extremism that they just wanted competent government and religious tolerance. It's like the medieval centrist movement, but with more swords. Charles IX's successor was his brother Henry, formerly Duke of Anjou, who had been elected King of Poland in one of Catherine's diplomatic coups. But Henry, he takes one look at Poland with its diet of nobles who actually expect to have a say in the government, and essentially goes, "No thank you," and flees back to France in the middle of the night when he hears that his brother is dead. Henry III is going to face all the same problems as his predecessors, except worse. The religious wars are far from over, and in fact, we're only about halfway through them. The royal finances are a disaster, noble factions are more entrenched than ever, and there's now a fourth claimant to worry about, the Protestant Henry of Navarre, who's technically next in line for the throne after Henry III and his brothers. What we've witnessed in this period from 1559 to 1574 is the complete breakdown of royal authority in France. Henry II's death in that jousting accident created a power vacuum that Catherine de' Medici tried to fill through manipulation and violence, but every solution she attempted only made the problems worse. The French religious wars represent something new in European history. Not just dynastic conflicts or international wars, but ideological civil wars, where neighbors kill neighbors over questions of religious truth and political legitimacy. It's a preview of the kinds of conflicts that will tear Europe apart for the next century, from the Dutch Revolt to the English Civil War to the 30 Years' War, and through it all, we see the tragic figure of Catherine de' Medici, a woman who was probably more capable than any of her sons, but whose methods were so ruthless and whose paranoia was so complete that she ended up destroying the very dynasty she was trying to preserve. The stage is now set for the final act of this drama, which will feature religious civil war, foreign invasion, noble rebellion, and ultimately the end of the Valois dynasty that has ruled France now for over 250 years. But that, as they say, is another story. For your AP exam, remember that the French religious wars weren't really about religion. They're about the breakdown of traditional authority structures in the face of new ideological challenges, economic pressures, and the personal ambitions of competing noble factions. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because this same pattern will repeat across Europe for the next century. Well, that's all for now. Class is dismissed, and remember, always wear proper safety equipment when jousting.